Hey, what's going on, everyone? Lauren Sisler here with AL.com. Happy game day to you. Happy Saturday. Unfortunately, not a happy finish for the Auburn Tigers, falling to South Carolina on the road, 30-22. The first time, I guess, in the history of this matchup between South Carolina and Auburn. South Carolina gets the win. It went down to the wire. Here to discuss it, Matt Scalisi with AL.com to kind of review everything that we kind of saw unfold. And, you know, I was with you last week. I was on the sidelines of a very rainy, yucky game against Arkansas, the question call at the end of the game. And then it's almost like I just felt like South Carolina really came out. Auburn came out flat against South Carolina. They just didn't have that juice and that energy. And there just seemed to be a lot of communication issues in this one. I want to just get your initial take on what you saw out there for those four quarters.
Yeah, Lauren, we talked about this morning on the pregame show that Auburn's offense, it's not that they've never shown signs of being good this season. It's inconsistency. There are moments where they really have looked very good, but they haven't been able to sustain that through multiple weeks and really even through an entire single game this year. I would say today there was unfortunately more of the negative than the positive. And I think, you know, part of that is that they met their match physically. I really think that for anyone who says Auburn should never lose to South Carolina, I think that you're underestimating how well Will Muschamp has recruited at South Carolina. They actually have quietly been doing a really good job bringing in great talent, and we saw a lot of those guys out there today. I think where it really caught up with Auburn in particular was at the line of scrimmage. And we know that this Auburn front seven on defense in particularly has a lot of talent. They're missing some guys. They were a little banged up there, particularly KJ Britt in the middle. And I think obviously on the other side of the ball, offensively, we've known that the offensive line is an issue for Auburn all season long. It was a big issue today. Bo Nix, people are going to be very critical of Bo Nix, and I understand that, and I think he deserves a fair amount of that criticism. But any quarterback in the sport of football at any level of the game does not play his best football when he is under pressure constantly. And Bo Nix very clearly never feels safe. He never feels like he has time, and he feels like he's got to. When he throws, he needs to throw on the run. He needs to fit it into tight windows. You know, these are the things that pressure does to a quarterback. And it's affecting Bo Nix's play. It's keeping him from being able to utilize his natural talent to the best of his ability. And we're seeing that play out in really every game, but particularly games against teams that have a really strong pass rush.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's the biggest key point that I saw unfold today was the fact that they were getting a lot of pressure on him. He didn't look comfortable. He didn't feel comfortable. The poise, like it just wasn't there. And again, you know, coming into the season, especially out of the gates against Kentucky, which we saw this Kentucky team just annihilate Tennessee, you know, it's really interesting to me because I did feel we saw a step forward for Bo Nix and that composure and that poise and that maturity. But all of a sudden, it just looks like they're starting to take steps backwards. It looks to me like, you know, Bo Nix just doesn't have that confidence. Third quarter, specifically, we saw that little thing on the sideline with Seth Williams and Bo Nix chirping at each other. Chad Morris kind of had to get in the mix. Holly Rowe was on the ESPN broadcast kind of talking about how they just were so flat. There was no energy. You could just see on their faces. And, of course, Bo Nix, I get it. Like, you know, you throw 3 interceptions, but to your point, that he's not getting the protection that he needs. And I think that's where this Auburn team, especially obviously from the offensive line standpoint, they aren't able to distribute the football and get things going. One bright spot, obviously Tank Bigsby. No doubt in my mind, Tank Bigsby is their guy. This is going to be someone that is going to carry this team for years to come. He's a tremendous playmaker for them, but he cannot get the job done. And I just want to point out, Matt, and just your thoughts, you know, towards the end of the game, obviously that final drive, Bo Nix trying to piece something together. And to me, it almost felt like the team waited till the very end to kind of get that spark, get that energy. And they started piecing stuff together. It looked like they might be able to pull this thing off. And then unfortunately, things kind of fell apart at the end, and it was just too little too late. And it seemed like it was the Bo Nix show, constantly under pressure, scrambling out. Let me get a few yards. Okay, constantly under pressure. And then they even pointed it out on the broadcast, he's a young quarterback. And one of the big things that Dave Passion mentioned, and even Greg McElroy on the call, and Greg being a former quarterback himself, it's just the decision making. And, instead of running out of bounds, he kind of tried to dive over and, ended up eating off more time of the clock. So, it's just little things like that add up to big things. And obviously a loss like this to South Carolina.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about the offensive game plan a little bit, Lauren. I think it's unfair to put the entire blame or credit even on a single person in this sport, because it's an extremely complex sport. There's 11 guys out there on your team at any given time, and there's a huge coaching staff on the sideline that are all involved in what's happening. And I think that, did Bo Nix execute perfectly today? Obviously he did not. Was he the only person involved in those plays not going well? Definitely not. Again, we talked about the protection already. Tank Bigsby was able to do some stuff today on just 16 carries. Okay. That to me, it makes me question immediately what's going on with this offense, that the guy that we're talking about is the most effective part of the offense today only touched the ball 16 times. All right. So we look at the stats here right now. Bo Nix had 47 passing attempts. The team as a whole, 36 rushing attempts. So first of all, that's not a balanced offense right there. On top of that, out of those 36 rushing attempts, 15 of them were Bo Nix. So a lot of those were not designed runs. A lot of those were scrambles because he ran out of time in the pocket. A lot of times he made stuff happen in a positive way. He finished with almost 70 yards rushing. So, altogether, we're talking about 72 snaps today where Bo Nix was the featured player, was the guy almost entirely being relied upon to make something happen. That's a lot to put on a sophomore, even an extremely talented sophomore, in the sport of college football at the highest level in the SEC. Auburn has got to mix this thing up a little bit more. And some of that is on Gus Malzahn and some of that is on Chad Morris. They have got to find a way to highlight what this team is doing well, move the play calling away from the stuff where Auburn is clearly struggling right now. And I haven't seen any of that happen so far. I think they need to make some pretty serious adjustments in the back 3/4 of the season, or 2/3, or however much of this season we have left at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's worth also mentioning, if you kind of look down the stat line in the team stat column, and, in the grand scheme of things, total yardage, Auburn had 481 total yards, South Carolina 297. Auburn basically outmatched South Carolina in the passing game, in the rushing game, not in penalties. Well, they outmatched them in a negative way. They had 9 penalties for 89 yards, which I know is something they're really going to have to address, because that hammered them there, especially late in the game, for them to be able to pick up that yardage. South Carolina was able to get that drive and obviously get the go-ahead touchdown with one of the penalties that was served up there late in the game. And then, of course, the turnovers were key. But when you look at it, an evenly matched game, it's not like South Carolina had all sorts of yards. They were just able to be more productive with what they had. They were able to put points on the board. And I think that is the biggest concern, is that this Auburn team not able to finish drives. And on the other side of it, some talented guys defensively for South Carolina that really went to work. J.C. Horn being one of them, obviously got the best of Seth Williams all day. Seth Williams just not having a great day, and obviously you saw that on the sidelines. And so, that to me was a big area of concern. But on the defensive side of the football, what did you kind of see from this Auburn defense, in terms of just their ability to get stops, critical stops when they needed to? To me, it just looked like it was all over the place. You'd see something good and then things would fall apart. And it just seemed like they weren't able to get a consistent thing going to be able to stop the South Carolina team, obviously from scoring and getting the win.
Yeah, look, I think there were some rough moments for the Auburn defense for sure, but I'm looking at South Carolina's offensive stats right now. I mean, you hold their quarterback to 15 of 24 for 144 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. I mean, that's a pretty pedestrian line. That's acceptable. That's a good defensive effort. You hold South Carolina as a team to 153 yards rushing. It's not spectacular, but
Right.
that is a total that Auburn is capable of winning a game when they keep a team under, right at 150 yards rushing total. And nobody had more than 100 yards. No individual player. They didn't have any receivers just that they couldn't stop all day long. I think Shi Smith had a couple of spectacular plays in this game, and that's going to happen to you sometimes. But again, I mean, he finished with 8 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown. Nobody exploded. This was nothing freakish happened in this game in terms of South Carolina's offense. This was a good, decent offensive performance from South Carolina. But Auburn's defense basically did everything they needed to do to win this game, and they have all season, and they're banged up still too. I don't think I can bring myself to assign any blame on this Auburn defense. I think they're doing everything you need them to do right now to put you in a position to win the game. And the fact that South Carolina got 30 points has a lot more to do with the fact that Auburn turned the ball over 3 times.
Right. That's exactly what I was going to say. And again, that goes back to the stat line that, I was talking about. There was nothing spectacular that South Carolina did. They just did it all at the right times. Were able to get that production, obviously turn that production into points. And I think that is obviously where Auburn, just wasn't able to finish drives, wasn't able to put those points on the board. And obviously, again, it came down to the wire a little bit, not enough too late. And I think you just put yourselves in those situations. And Auburn is a team that has been known to be able to perform at a high level when their backs are against the wall. But I think, unfortunately, they just didn't have that energy going into that third and fourth quarter. Even coming out of the half, you could just tell there was just they just didn't have that spark, that juice. And it's almost like they had already given up in some ways before they had even started that the second half. And I didn't really get a good sense that like this was going to be like a big time comeback for this Auburn football team, just based on the mojo and the juice that they were kind of displaying out there. So, I agree with you. I think the defense definitely, stepped up really big early in this football game. I think that obviously there were some things that they can work on. They were shaky at times, giving up a couple big plays, which obviously led to points. But again, I'm with you. I think the offense obviously is the area of biggest concern. Injuries, area of concern. And now going ahead, I think that you now have a 2-2 Auburn team that this perhaps was probably the easiest game on their schedule, maybe. As you go forward, they go on the road now to Ole Miss. We saw what they did with Alabama. They host LSU. Then they've got Mississippi State on the road, Tennessee at home, and then they're at Alabama, and then they host Texas A&M. So, if you're looking at that schedule, Matt,
that's rough, man.
Yeah,
that is
your overall thoughts there. I mean,
there's not an easy win left on the schedule, unfortunately. Yeah. I mean, they're all going to be hard fought. I think watching Tennessee implode today is a promising sign for Auburn.
The thing I was going to say is watching that Tennessee. If you would have asked me before the game, I probably wouldn't have said that. After watching Tennessee perform the way they did against Kentucky, definitely a little bit of a
I mean, the good news for Auburn is that nobody in this league is perfect, and everybody has had issues right now. I would say maybe Georgia's had the least issues, and that one's behind you at this point. But, like you said, Ole Miss has an incredibly talented, powerful offense. Provided those guys are all back next week, because there's a lot of them missing this week because of COVID.
Right.
We know that LSU has deep flaws in their defense, but they're still an extremely talented team. Mississippi State can put a lot of points up and a lot of yards up. And, I would say if I'm looking down the rest of the schedule, the games that I think Auburn's best opportunities going forward here are the teams that are pretty heavily reliant on scoring a lot of points offensively. So, look, Auburn's offense has real issues. I think the cure for them is playing a bad defense. They're going to play a really bad defense next week against Ole Miss. LSU's defense the week after that, which is not great. So this is a crucial 2 weeks here where there's going to be a ton of pressure on Auburn's offense, but a ton of opportunity because they're going to be playing against two units that have been really, really bad at stopping anybody. So the yards and the points should come a little bit easier for Auburn for the next 2 weeks, but they're going to have to, because the other side of that is they're playing against some elite offensive talent on the other side of the ball. So those are going to be tough games. I think, right now, talking about winning the West is probably a very far-fetched goal for this Auburn team, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing to play for. It doesn't mean that they're out of it. I mean, 2 losses, if you can hope for, let's say Alabama at this point.
We've seen some wild things these last 4 weeks.
Absolutely.
I mean,
if we can,
4. I mean, we've seen some wild things.
If Alabama can drop a game at some point, then Auburn heads into and Auburn wins out. Auburn can head into the Iron Bowl with a chance to win the West. So you're on the precipice right now. If you lose another one, you're pretty much knocked out of any hope for winning the West. But they can rally, they can figure out some things and get better. And like I said, even though the next 2 games look like they're going to be very difficult, they actually will not be the worst matchups in the world for Auburn. So they're big opportunities.
Go back. Did you say precipice?
The precipice, Lauren.
What does that mean?
The edge of the cliff.
Oh, wow. So that's a term used if you're mountain climbing?
You're on the precipice is like if the road runner, goes off the edge of the cliff. That was the precipice.
You know what I call that? Living on the edge. A little Aerosmith.
Yeah, they are. They're living. Auburn is living on the edge for the rest of this season. That's what it's
right.
Feel
Absolutely.
Like. Yep.
Hey, good stuff, Matt. I appreciate it. Again, final score: Auburn falling to South Carolina for the first time since 1933. I wanted to make sure I had that right when I was coming out.
First time as SEC opponents.
Right. First time as SEC opponents. I had to get that little underscore there.
Thank you, Patrick.
You know what's funny? Because I would look at that word and probably think it says precipice, like recipe.
My only regret about this broadcast so far is that I did not get a chance to hear you attempt to say that word before you heard me say it.
Oh wow, yeah, that probably would have been some entertainment. Oh yeah. Boy, you know how that goes.
Yeah,
look, I appreciate it as always. We'll check back in obviously this week, news, analysis, notes as we cruise right into week 5 of the SEC college football season. Right now we're in week 4. A lot of good SEC matchups going on the rest of the day, so it'll be interesting. Hold on to your seats, friends. Bye.